wealth has a sound. The clink of champagne glasses at country clubs, the polished hush of boardrooms, the shuffle of papers signed with Mont Blanc pens, and quiet confidence. For nearly 3 decades, Scott Mason mastered that sound. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He was more dangerous. The man who radiated trust. The advisor who didn't just handle your money, he held your future. Families handed him their savings, friends gave him their confidence, even his own relatives signed their names on the dotted line because Scott Mason asked them to. But beneath the shine of Rubicon Wealth Management lay something rotten. Scott Mason wasn't building futures, he was draining them. Dollar by dollar, bit by bit, and behind a mask of reassurance. He promised security and delivered devastation. And when the empire crumbled, the man who once managed more than $200 million wound up working at McDonald's, earning barely more than the price of a Happy Meal. This isn't just a story about fraud. It's about betrayal dressed as friendship. It's about wealth as a costume, trust as a weapon, and a fall so dramatic it feels like satire. But for Scott Mason's victims, the punchline isn't funny. Today we are talking about Scott Mason, who went from Rubicon riches to McDonald's mornings. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Scott Jeffrey Mason grew up in Pennsylvania with a shadow most children never know. His father, Melvin Burrell Mason, was convicted in the 1970s for running a Ponzi scheme. That shame followed the family like a bad smell. For young Scott, it became either a warning sign or a blueprint, maybe both. By the 1990s, Scott Mason had polished himself into a stockbroker in Philadelphia. He was remembered not for genius with numbers, but for his silver tongue. He made ordinary people feel sophisticated just for talking to him. He had a gift for metaphors. Bonds became sturdy trees. Diversified portfolios became baskets of fruit. Clients didn't always understand the mechanics, but they understood Scott Mason. He was safe. He was confident. He was theirs. In 1995, he co-founded Rubicon Wealth Management. The name was deliberate. The Rubicon was Caesar's fateful river crossing, a line of no return. Scott Mason wanted his clients to feel they were part of something bold, historic, inevitable. Investing with him wasn't just financial, it was destiny. Rubicon set itself apart as boutique. Personal and elite. No call centers, no distant skyscraper offices. Clients were neighbors, small business owners, church friends, retirees. Scott promised modest strategies, short-term bonds, careful diversification, nothing flashy. His mantra was safety, security, growth without risk. By 2024, Rubicon managed $231 million for about 115 clients. That figure alone radiated legitimacy. Scott's personal life mirrored the image. A mainline mansion, a Jersey Shore beach house, memberships at exclusive clubs. His children's weddings were 6-figure affairs with champagne towers and floral displays the size of cars. Scott Mason didn't just advise wealth, he lived it. For clients, it was intoxicating. Trusting Scott felt like joining the right team, like being allowed past a velvet rope into a private club. He wasn't just their advisor, he was proof they had made it. But here's the cruel irony. Scott Mason wasn't building their futures. He was quietly hollowing them out, smiling all the while, convincing people they should be grateful. He would tell them Rubicon meant the point of no return, and he wasn't lying. Fraud doesn't collapse overnight, it frays. For years, Scott's world looked airtight. Account statements arrived on schedule, printed neatly with returns that were steady, believable. His lifestyle mirrored the numbers. Vacations, fine wine, nice cars. But little cracks began to appear. One retiree noticed a withdrawal she hadn't authorized. She assumed it was a mistake. Scott Mason smiled, reassured her, and promised to fix it. He produced a corrected statement. Problem solved. Another client, younger, more detail-oriented, realized that his balances didn't match his own notes. Scott Mason told him it was a short-term transfer, a bond rollover. His explanation was calm, almost fatherly, and the client left reassured and cheated. Then came Star Citron, who is Scott's aunt by marriage. Family trusts differently. When Star noticed unexplained charges, she asked pointed questions, and Scott brushed her off with polished answers. But Star didn't let go. She was the kind of woman who knew when someone was lying, and Scott Mason was lying. In 2014, Scott created Orchard Park Real Estate Holdings. On client statements, it looked like a vehicle for short-term bonds or real estate deals. Clients saw the name and assumed stability. In truth, Orchard Park was a funnel. Money went in, but it did not come back out. Well, at least not to them. Scott layered his lies with forged signatures on withdrawal forms. He doctored records. He mailed out statements that showed healthy returns when there were none. For some, he became more than an advisor. He was practically a family member. One client trusted Scott so completely that Scott managed not just his investments, but personal bills, expenses, and even checkbooks. It was financial guardianship twisted into exploitation. But every forgery, every fake statement added weight to the house of cards. Compliance officers at brokerage firms started noticing. Transfers didn't match stated strategies. Signatures looked off. The whispers turned into quiet suspicions. Scott used to brag that he specialized in long-term planning. Turns out his long-term plan was forging signatures until his wrists gave out. Between 2014 and 2024, Scott Mason siphoned at least $17 million from 13 clients. The scheme was a labyrinth. Money slid from client accounts into Orchard Park, then to Rubicon's general accounts, and finally into Scott's personal holdings. He wanted complexity. He wanted confusion. The stolen money didn't just disappear. It bought the life that Scott paraded before his clients. The Jersey Shore beach house, the luxury vacations, the memberships at the country clubs, places where Scott drank wine with the people he was secretly fleecing. 6-figure weddings for his children, and in one of the most absurd twists, a stake in a miniature golf course. Imagine losing your retirement so your advisor could build a fiberglass pirate ship with a windmill? I mean, honestly. Scott's trick was to repay suspicious clients with funds stolen from others. Oh boy, one day I will tell my story. If someone pressed too hard, he dipped into another account and made a small repayment. It looked like interest. It was actually theft paying for theft. Prosecutors later compared it to a mini Ponzi scheme. By early 2024, the strain showed. Brokerage compliance officers flagged transfers. The numbers on client statements didn't match bank records. Scott was juggling faster, talking smoother, running out of road. Behind the scenes, investigators were circling. Forensic accountants started tugging threads. They followed the money, one transfer at a time, discovering that Orchard Park was a mirage. The fake bonds weren't bonds at all. The investments were ghosts. And then came the breaking point. Star Citron stopped asking polite questions. She contacted lawyers. She pressed banks for explanations. And she filed formal complaints. Scott wasn't just dealing with curious clients anymore. He was facing a woman armed with documentation and persistence. The fuse was lit. The empire was about to burn. And here's the kicker. Scott always said Rubicon meant no turning back. He wasn't wrong. By 2024, he had crossed into territory even his silver tongue couldn't explain away. Fraud sometimes looks clean on paper, just digits sliding across screens, but when you peel it back, it bleeds. Behind every line item on Scott's statements was a life upended. Let's start with Star Citron, Scott's aunt by marriage. She wasn't just a client, she was family. She had entrusted Scott with millions, believing blood meant loyalty. When she realized over $3 million had vanished, it wasn't just financial devastation, it was personal betrayal. Imagine realizing the man who hugs you at family weddings was quietly siphoning your future at the same time. Oh wait, I don't have to imagine that. One day. Then there was Stanley J. Tulin, a retired insurance executive. He had spent decades building security, expecting a comfortable retirement. Scott gutted it. Tulin was forced to sell his retirement home. His golden years were boxed up and sold off because a man he trusted decided his comfort was worth more than Tulin's dignity. Another victim, a founding partner of Red Teddimer O'Connell and Partners, had celebrated selling his advertising agency. It should have been the triumph of his career. Scott toasted him at a party, smiling and raising a glass, all while funneling his proceeds into fake accounts. It's a betrayal so audacious, it borders on theater. But the stories that cut deepest weren't the headline names. A grandmother who had saved carefully for her grandchildren's education saw that future evaporate. A widow who relied on Mason's guidance realized she had been living in a house of lies. Couples put off medical care. Families argued over what to do next. In court, these stories spilled out. Victims stood in front of the judge and spoke through tears. One whispered, "He didn't just take my money, he took my peace." Yeah. Another admitted she couldn't even let her children help her with their finances anymore. Scott had stolen not only wealth, but trust itself. Fraud is psychological warfare. Victims feel stupid and ashamed. Many withdrew from social lives. Some fell into depression. Others became paranoid of banks, advisors, even family. Scott hadn't just destroyed accounts, he had dismantled confidence in human decency. And here's the dark joke of it all. Scott sold himself as a builder of legacies. What he really built was a twisted support of neighbors sitting in court comparing horror stories, each realizing their trusted advisor was less financial genius and more con man with a country club membership. Scott Mason wasn't toppled in a single dramatic raid. His empire crumbled piece by piece until even his smoothest explanations couldn't hold it together. It began with the compliance officers. Brokerage firms are built to sniff out anomalies, and Scott's accounts began to reek. Transfers were routed through Orchard Park in ways that didn't match the strategies he claimed. Withdrawal forms bore signatures that looked suspicious. At first, these irregularities were quietly flagged, but when clients, especially Star Citron, raised alarms, those whispers turned into shouts. Enter the forensic accountants. They're the bloodhounds of white-collar crime, and they followed Scott's money trail like it was a scent of gasoline leading straight to a fire. Each subpoena pulled another lie into daylight. Transfers from client accounts showed up in Scott's personal holdings, his shore house, his children's wedding payments, even that absurd miniature golf course. Orchard Park wasn't a legitimate investment arm. It was a cardboard mask. Investigators seized files, computers, correspondence. They interviewed clients who sat stunned, learning their comfortable futures were fictional. They found doctored statements, forged documents, and a decade-long pattern of deception. Inside Rubicon, Scott must have felt the walls closing in. His reassurances grew brittle. Colleagues whispered. Clients stopped taking his calls. And by late 2024, Scott wasn't the trusted advisor of Gladwin anymore. He was the desperate man sweating behind a desk while federal agents circled. In January 2025, prosecutors moved. They charged Scott Mason with wire fraud, securities fraud, investment advisor fraud, and filing false tax returns. The evidence was overwhelming. In court, prosecutors painted Scott Mason as a man who weaponized trust. They described forged signatures, false statements, and millions siphoned under the guise of stewardship. Victims sat behind them, shaking their heads, some crying, some glaring daggers at the man they had once called a friend. Scott tried remorse. "I know what I did was wrong," he told the judge. "There are no excuses. I stole from people who trusted me to live a lifestyle I could not live on my own." It was a polished delivery, the same skill he'd used to sell his lies. But this time, no one was buying. Judge Timothy Savage sentenced Scott Mason to 97 months in prison, just over 8 years, plus 3 years of supervised release. The judge ordered nearly $25 million in restitution and more than $2.3 million to the IRS. Scott's assets were liquidated. His shore house, his Long Beach property, his piece of the golf course, his New Spring holdings stake. But restitution is smoke. The money was gone. Victims would never truly be made whole. And Scott himself? Before sentencing, reports revealed he had been working at McDonald's, earning just above minimum wage. From managing $231 million to managing fry baskets. A man once courted by millionaires was now serving them Egg McMuffins. Well, I doubt millionaires eat Egg McMuffins. I would if I was a millionaire. I like them. The irony is cruel but cinematic. Scott promised clients steady returns. In the end, the only returns he produced came in paper bags with fries on the side. Why did Scott Mason do it? Some point to his father. Growing up with a convicted fraudster for a father can warp your compass. Maybe Scott wanted to prove he was different, or maybe he wanted to prove he could do it better. Either way, the deception became the family heirloom. Psychologists describe fraudsters as driven by narcissism, greed, and an insatiable need for admiration. That's for sure. Scott wasn't content to live comfortably. He wanted to be envied. He wanted to stand at country clubs, clinking those glasses, embodying success. When reality couldn't sustain that lifestyle, he built a fantasy. But Scott's theft went deeper than money. He stole peace of mind. He robbed families of security, marriages of harmony, and communities of trust. He left scars that no restitution check can heal. Some victims will never retire. Some will never trust again. Some will never forgive themselves for believing him. Now, Scott sits in prison. His name is a byword for betrayal, whispered in Gladwin country clubs, muttered in victim support groups. He is remembered not as the man who built Rubicon, but as the man who burned it down. And the final punchline? The man who once managed $231 million became a cautionary tale, a trivia fact, a joke about Happy Meals. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I hope you enjoyed that story. Very disturbing. I think the scariest thing is there are so many more Scott Masons out there. This is my podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. I post every Monday and Wednesday. This is our fundraiser. Our community raises money to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that's never been tested. We are very close to reaching our first goal. We're going to pick a case, we're going to vote, and then we're going to donate the money to the police department. I appreciate each and every single one of you. When I'm having a bad week, I look forward to posting and I look forward to talking with you in the comments. You mean the world to me. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.